We just wanted to say at this time, our hearts go out to our fellow podcast member, Johnny, who can't join us today because unfortunately his father passed away. We wanted to let him and his family know that our hearts go out to him and that our hearts are with them. Our sincere condolences. And I myself, I personally never had the privilege of meeting Johnny's father, but you are the fruit of your father. And by knowing you, I know that he must have been a good and great man, because I've known the son that he was able to raise, and you uplifted our lives. And I know that that's just a minuscule part of what he had to offer to uplift the lives of his family and the people around him. And so rest in peace to him. Also like to extend our sincere condolences as well to THT Cyrus, who joined us recently on one of our more recent episodes. We know his mother passed away as well. Our hearts go out to you. We see the work you do. We see the light that you've shared with us in the brief time we've been able to know you, and the light you share with people abroad through your music. Thank you for doing that, because we know that's a credit to who you've come from. And rest in peace to her, and our sincere condolences to you and your family, both to Johnny and to THT Cyrus. Thank you.
Talofa, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Lava Lava. We are your Fiapoko Samoan veterans who talk about topics surrounding the Samoan culture and life. And I'm your host, Michael Tan, and here with me are Spencer Harman, Milford Tiafala, and Atimua Migi. If you want to hear more content like this, be sure to follow and listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. We are also available on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Well, let's get straight into it. Today's topic is on values. These are the things you believe are important to you that guide the way you live your life. So the values we've learned growing up and how they changed you throughout the years, or if they've changed. So I'm going to throw it out to the cast.
I guess I'll lead the way. So one of the biggest values that I learned when I was growing up in American Samoa, and this is specifically from my mom, she would always, beat this into me and my siblings, is always be honest, be truthful, because one of the biggest things to her was just having the ability to trust people. And if, you break that trust by not being honest, that's one of the biggest things that'll bring, because it goes back to, your name. It's a valuable thing that, it's like a badge of honor that we walk with amongst ourselves. And once it gets out there that, hey, I might have lied or said something, it doesn't even have to be a lie. It could be the actions that I'm doing that brings the bad to our family name. When I mean by family name, it means my dad's last name, because that's the one that she carries and she's proud of it. And then she kind of, gets that, beats us every day with it. At the end of the day, not a lot of people are going to know you, but they're going to judge you based off of what you say and the actions. And it's key that you be honest, because, that's all people could probably judge you on based off of just that first time appearance. So yeah, that's one of the biggest things, is just that honesty part. Today, that's still a big part of me. I carried that, when I was young, going through the military, even till now. That's one of the biggest things that I value in my marriage, with people that I deal with, and people in general. When I mean people I deal with, my family, friends, and, just somebody that I've never met before, I kind of judge on that based off of how honest can you be. And then I establish a relationship, and it kind of bases off of, that in a way. So yeah, it's a key thing. And I think it hasn't really changed for me. I don't know about you guys, but it's a valuable key trait for our culture, to be honest.
For me, throughout my life, from childhood to my adulthood, the one value that remains is humility or humbleness. When I think about it, I was able to avoid a lot of confrontations in my life just by being humble. It's also my strongest value that I think that has shaped my path throughout life, when I graduated high school to joining the Marine Corps, to leaving the Marine Corps, and up to the point that where I am, I've learned a lot of things just by being humble, both the negative and the positive aspects I've seen. And through humility, I've learned other values like compassion. What I see with others, I learn with their mistakes. I learn from other people's experiences by observing them. And I think my main drive in life for basically everything that I do is just by being humble. It basically helps with all my decision making. If I am prideful, there are times that I'm very prideful, but I always remember to always lower myself to a certain level, to always be humble in everything I do, and that's why to this point I'm successful in my own definition of what success is. In my relationship, at my job, my friendships. So that's one value that I abide is humility.
So for me, not unlike many others, especially in the Samoan community, I know that my values that I was raised with stem from the church. My earliest memories are my mom teaching us the song in the LDS church, the I Am a Child of God, because she wanted us to understand who we are and our standing in the world, because it was a value that no matter where you go, if things seem unsafe or you feel lonely or alone, remember who you are and who ultimately is looking out for you. And also remember that's what keeps our family together. Growing up, like before we would go to school, like living in 29, we lived out on Amboy Road. We had a long walk to go to the bus stop. And before we'd walk through the desert, Mom would sit us down and have me and my brother like recite the articles of faith, just things that we had to have our church spiritual lesson before we could go to school and have our educational lesson. And that's kind of really been the centerpiece for my upbringing. I've taken that with me into my adult years. I know that people kind of come and go with in and out, like religion's just a different thing for every person, but it's one that I've held to, even though, am I saying that I'm a great example of a Latter-day Saint? I'm like, no, you can definitely, if you know me, you can point to me and find definite flaws and shortcomings, and I'll fully acknowledge them. But the fact that I even view them as a shortcoming means that I still regard those values as my values. If they weren't my values, then it wouldn't be a shortcoming. It'd be like, whatever. So as I grew older and just started moving out into life, especially into military life, you start coming face to face with a lot of things that challenge your values. Not really challenge them, but the challenge comes in trying to stay true to those values while also being in an environment that may not fully sustain that culture. But that might add to some of my shortcomings. But overall, it's like, yeah, my values came from the church, and which ultimately was a family thing. So I know I'm kind of talking in circles, but it's like those were all connected. It's like my connection to the church was also my connection to my family. And that doesn't even mean to say that my family who aren't totally aligned with the church are in any ways less of my family. That's absolutely not the case. It's like that's a recurring theme, that whether or not we're all sharing those same church values, we're still all family, and because we're taught to love each other regardless. That's kind of the core of my upbringing there.
I'm kind of in the same boat as far as the church having a big influence on values and what my parents taught. So I'll take it back a bit. Before I became corrupted as a child, things my parents emphasized as youngins. Love and kindness were two of the big main ones. So I didn't really grow up around fellow Samoans too much. We're back on Schofield Barracks around this time, and all we knew was to love one another, be kind to others, courteous, all that. And then we got bullied a lot, my brother and I. And it was confusing to me as a young buck back then because I wasn't ready, for all this hostileness and why are people being mean to me, when I'm just being loving and kind as, I think to be at that age, that young age. And, you got all these kids picking on us and making fun of us and just for being who we were. And I guess going through all that as a youngin', that's what kind of turned me or led the way to me being what they would call nowadays a try hard. Later on, trying to be tough, this and that, or what I see on TV, what I perceive as hard and whatnot. But even in the back of my mind, those have been two of the key things that stuck with me. Even though I've been a jerk, I've done a lot of people wrong, and I've learned from that. But those were two of my main values that I remember that greatly affected me growing up.
I got a question, fellas. So just going back, so were you guys ever challenged, on your values? I know for me, with 10, the secondary thing that my mom really kind of put in there as far as our upbringing was just to be humble. And I got challenged on that many times. And it was just, just in the village. And then at the same time, other kids, they try to fight you and stuff like that. And then we would get into fights, and then we'd get home, we get a beating. And then she would tell us, loko maulalo, that means humble in Samoan. But it's really challenging because, you want to defend yourself from all these bullies. And then at the same time, that has that little ringing in the back of your ear, like, if I'm going to do something right now, I'm going to get an ass whooping. So kind of one of those things where, like, yeah, I got challenged a lot on that value alone, especially my second brother. I'm more, I take a lot of what my mom to heart. But my second brother, he's like way different from me, man. Like he'll just ignore everything and just go at it. And then, a lot of the fights that I've been in was because I had to go cover for his ass. I had to go, step in and do my part as a brother to help him out. And then not only that, I would get all the more of the beating because I'm the oldest. He's over there laughing and, afterwards. But moral to the thing is, were you guys ever challenged like I was?
Yeah, UT and Ati talking about all these bullying and childhood stuff is kind of bringing back some bad memories for me. So yeah, that's why my main value that I stuck with is humility, because I've been on both sides, similar to T, both sides of the spectrum here. I used to be a bully, and I used to be bullied. So I have been challenged many times, but I've always reverted to that golden rule where you do unto others what you want done unto you. I've always thought of that and used that phrase to guide my life in everything that I've done. I treat people the same way that I want to be treated, and it stemmed from that bullied childhood. I have been challenged in other values, such as, honesty. There are many times where I've been dishonest, but there's, I've always reverted to, because I grew up in a Christian household, these things are drilled into your mind, to your brain. So you always revert back to the things that you've learned from your parents, from your church leaders, from, your role models. So for me, honesty was one of those things that, if I do something wrong, then I'll immediately regret. I feel a lot of guilt doing it. So that brings back a childhood memory of me going in a store, stealing candy bars and fish hooks. Back in American Samoa, I always did that. I never got caught. But I felt guilty. And it's a good thing because, I grew up and those things fell off. Cheating, lying. I might lie here and there, but, it's like a white lie. But that's all I'm going to say on that matter.
I can definitely relate a bit too with the bullying thing. I kind of went down a little bit of the same road as what Tia mentioned about, like, I would lean into the try hard kind of territory, because you growing up like firmly in the church, you start going out into the world. A lot of people really view that as corny, and their perception of what an LDS kid is. It's like they might think you're just some Peter priesthood geek kind of dude. And so, like, some people will be like, "Oh, this dude's corny." So sometimes I might overcompensate to try to prove, "Nah, man, it's not like that. Don't mess with me." I'm kind of lucky that I didn't get smacked around like for overcompensating, because I probably made myself more aggressive than I should. And ironically, like, a lot of that calmed down. That attitude of mine really got quelled when I started getting into jiu-jitsu, because when I actually put myself through some kind of training and learning what it means to actually get into a fight and experience the realities of what unarmed conflict is more like, I became more confident of what my real capabilities were. And so this need to feel like I was overcompensating was kind of dissipated, because I had a very firm grasp on where I stood, and it humbled me a lot. But then, like, as far as getting bullied, I'll honestly say I'm very fortunate that I didn't have severe cases of bullying growing up, which is surprising, because I was a pretty geeky kid. Like, I would have picked on me if I knew me as a kid, but but I've always had cousins that looked out for me. I've had friends that were patient with me. I've had a sanctuary of a household to grow up in. I'd say the only time that I really felt a bit of a conflict with some bullying was when I went and I was a missionary. When I was 19, I became a missionary. And the year before that, that's when I joined the Army. Little secret for all the jarheads on this podcast, my plan was always to join the Marine Corps. Growing up in 29 Palms, being surrounded by Marines, that was, if you're going to be in the military, that was the branch. All my uncles were Marines. It's like, but then as I got older, I knew I needed to be a missionary when I turned 19. And when I talked to the branches, the Marine Corps at the time were like, "Look, we're fighting 2 campaigns right now. You can't get trained as a Marine and then take off and go preach the word. You have to do 4 years of your contract, and then you'll go off on the IRR or whatnot, and you can be a missionary then." Whereas the Army Reserves approached me and said, "Look, you can go to basic, you can go to AIT, you'll get paid for all that. That'll be funding for your mission, and then we'll put you on IRR immediately. Go do your missionary thing, and when you come back, we got you." And so that's why I ended up joining the Army. So here I am, an 18-year-old kid. I'm going through boot camp. I'm going through AIT. I'm just rah, pumped up American soldier. I'm getting ready to get sent to war. And then that's what it was in my mind, And then you finish that, go on IRR, put in my mission papers, and now I've got to go be a representative of Jesus Christ and learn to turn my cheek and whatnot. That was a real test for a 19-year-old kid, because I go from being amped up, let's do this, want to fight, get in your face for anything, to bite your tongue, calm down, turn the other cheek. And it was a real growing experience, because Edmonton, Alberta is not a rough place, but look, that Peter priesthood corny thing, like, that's a real thing where people mess with you because they're like, "Oh, here comes those dorky guys on their bikes with the name tags and the white shirts." I had people throw water bottles at me driving by, and I had people yell random stuff. I had people slam doors in my face. And then when it wasn't that, I would have bad experiences with the church members who were very kind and would host us for dinner. But then sometimes they start messing with you because you're American. Canadians, just like most of the world, are very fond of talking trash on America, especially in the 2000s. We had George W. Bush. We were running these wars in Iraq, and everybody hated America. And that translated over. And so I was really tested to learn to bite my tongue and remember your values and who you're here to represent. Get over yourself, and remember, it's not about you. Let people say what they want. And I don't mean to paint a bad picture of all Canadians. My experience in Edmonton, Alberta was overwhelmingly positive, but there were times that I was tested, and that was a definite test of my values. And like, sometimes I try to go back to those times, because since that time I poured myself more into the Army, into other parts of life, and I may get shorter tempered than I used to be. And I try to remember, man, go back to when you were 19 to 21 years old and try to tap into that guy who is able to calm down and remember it's not all about you. Try to be the best person you can. And you're not here to prove yourself to people and prove yourself that you're a tough guy. Or even in the Army, if people are testing you, just remember there's only so much you can do, and don't lose your values or control yourself just because your situation's harsh.
The one thing that's caused me to turn a blind eye on my values is peer pressure. Peer pressure is a main thing that's caused my values to be tested all the time. When, I'm this young kid from American Samoa who just joined the Marine Corps, who knows nothing about the world that's out there. We're from an island. You get out there, you're naive of what's going on with the world, and you get thrown out there, and the people you're around with, or your buddies that the people who were surround you at the time during boot camp, and then the schools that you go for training, and then the first unit that you get to. These people are the first people that you encounter that will set, the precedent, or set the environment, and everything that factors into challenging your values. So because of peer pressure, I've started drinking and doing all these nonsense when I was in the Marine Corps. And when I left the Marine Corps, I slowed down and started to revert back to, I wouldn't say revert back to like my pre-military days, but I'm more experienced, and I know better not to do things because of the values, my core values, right?
Yeah, peer pressure. Mm-hmm. So growing up, I was in my own world a lot. Like, I didn't really comprehend anything, like really retain information for myself, because I had an older brother. I would watch and, learn from his mistakes or people around me and what was going on. I don't know how long it was until I really started comprehending what I was reading, what I was watching, what was being taught to me. I just knew how to get by. So I guess that's why I can know a fellow dirtbag right off the bat when I meet one, or when I see one. I can spot people just because I've been reading people pretty much instinctively my whole life. Like, even with peer pressure, just because I was a big old dummy, a lot of things I did just out of pure curiosity. Like, values, I'd say that I have, well, mostly growing up, I'd say I'd be like 10. I was abiding by the golden rule. I just didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to cause anybody pain, even though I knew what it was like. I didn't like seeing people sad or, miserable. That wasn't my thing. But yeah, a lot of the values I ended up cherishing and keeping ingrained in my heart is out of retrospect, and really realizing what my parents were trying to teach me, what my uncles, aunties, bishops, teachers, leaders, all through life. And, it sucks to really come to that realization of what they were trying to teach you at the time. But I think I got to be grateful for that, though, because I hold on to it more now than possibly I would have done then. So, yeah, I had no idea what was going on in the world as a kid, teenager, and adult.
So let's talk on the values that a lot of Samoans growing up, we learn these, and that's the fa'aloalo, respect. It's loyalty, honor, and the list can go on. But the main thing that we learn in our household is respect. What is you guys' experience on that? Because for me, I went to all those Bible study schools when you're little, the Aonga Samoa, and how I was taught respect was if you're doing something wrong, then they'll hit you with something, and then they'll always follow up with a lesson or telling you to do this, especially when you're listening to elders. We're taught respect.
Yeah, I definitely had some similar experiences, just in the sense of, because like I said, it was our values growing up were all based around the church. And in 29 Palms, my mom and dad, my siblings, and my aunties and uncles and my cousins. And it would be a occasional thing where we would all get together and do a big family night. Sometimes it'd just be the family, like just our household, but we would often get together and have the whole Samoan family get together. And it's just one of those things where it's a very different setting than any other gathering I had, because it was all about respect. You respect uncle's house because he's the patriarch of the household. He's the person who presides over this. You don't come into his house and disrespect by making lots of noise. It's one of those settings where you could hear a pin drop. Like the silence is just so thick, you feel like you could cut through it. And it's because all the kids in that setting, you might be wild, you might be rambunctious, but not there, not during that setting. You get together, you sit on the floor, you sing the hymn. Even me and my brother, we don't speak any Samoan, but you were singing out of the Samoan hymn book. You figure it out, and even just being quiet would be disrespectful. You listened when the elders spoke. It was really that kind of setting. And it was, you might get sasad if you get out of line, but there's no other experience like that I've had outside of that in my life. And it's just one of those things where when I think of where I learned what respect means, that's my default. That's what I go back to in my mind.
I think what we're about to say is altogether is about to it's going to be similar. But I'm going to touch on a little bit on, I think, I'm actually going to say this, but I think the fabric of Samoan culture is all based off of the word respect. I'm going to go as far as to say that prior to the church arriving on our shores in the Samoan Islands, respect was key in our culture, our livelihood. It was the very fabric that held families together. It was a very fabric that held the villages, the community, especially small families, in Samoan life. That's my opinion. But I know that respect is one of those key element things that we first learn. I'm just going as far as with all four of us here. That was one of the first things that we were taught. I know that was one of the first things that we were taught. I was taught was having respect, especially the relationship between me and my dad, me and my siblings, and then it goes off to me and people in the village, me and people in the community. Go as far as the highest level of respect you give to the elders in the village. And then the utmost respect goes to the pastor in the village and his family and the kids. There's those levels of respect that really ties our culture, and I think is really something that's really holding our culture and way of life till now, is because of the word respect. Till, it's way before the church got to our shores, way before we got to the island of Samoa, respect was key, because without respect, a lot of, we would probably be miscommunication. We wouldn't listen to everybody else. So for me, respect was one of those important things that was a bedrock in my upbringing. I know in our household, there's four of us, and then we only have one sister. And in Samoan culture, the wa'afaloalo between you and your sister is very important. It's one of those key things that you protect her at all costs. And we only have one sister, and everybody says, oh, she has a lot of bodyguards. And I wouldn't say it that way. I would just put it in a sense where, we respect our sister, and, in turn, that's how we kind of live life. My sister's like 26, 27 now. She doesn't even bring her boyfriend around the house. She doesn't. She hasn't even introduced us to any of her boyfriends yet, and she's 26. And till now, I haven't really met any of her, or I don't even know if she even has a boyfriend actually. But it's just because of that respect thing is the reason why she understands that if she's going to bring somebody home, that's going to be the person that she marries. And I guess that's one of the things that was key in our upbringing. But yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities, what we're about to say with every other Samoan. But of course, that's my opinion against everybody else.
So once again, back to the disrespectful child. So I saw how to be respectful, but I didn't necessarily understand why. Like, I could put on the show, like I knew how to behave, but then sooner or later I was about to mess it up. And my parents were very patient. It's amazing how they dealt with me, because I was disrespectful a lot of times, where I did get my butt beat, but not as many times as I should have, probably. But I mean, once again, in retrospect, understanding or seeing how, and then later understanding why, I think it's what's able to help me with employment opportunities, military, and afterwards, just with respect comes discipline. I think in a lot of cases it transfers over to how you attack things. I think that's why a lot of Polynesians straight up are successful in the military right away, is because they're used to that respect and structure and being obedient. But I mean, it means a lot now, because somebody disrespects my wife or kids, or a family member of mine. I don't care if they disrespect me, it's whatever, but or even a friend of mine who they may think is weaker or whatnot, then that'll set me off. And side note, happy Daughter's Day, by the way, National Daughter's Day, Tan. So I know respect's gonna be key to you, because you got little girls to watch for too. As soon as they bring their boyfriends around, I can see why Ati's sister don't bring her boyfriends around. but yeah.
So let's talk on the other aspect, the more of a downfall of the word falalo, or respect, in the Samoan household, because let's try to play devil's advocates here and look at it from both sides. I know there's positives, but at the same time there are negatives, especially when it comes to where we're taught at a young age, respect. Don't talk back to your elders. Don't question them. Do as you're told. And for a lot of us, we grew up doing that. And I'm not saying us here, but in general, there are people who grow up and then they fall off the wagon. I'm speaking on the terms of you grow up with a lot of mental health problems. So what do you guys think?
One thing that comes to mind immediately is sexual assault. Like, hey, that didn't happen because this is a prominent member of our community, of our village, of our church, of everything. You keep your mouth shut. That never happened. Or you're lucky. That type of thing. Suck it up. That's one part. That's one thing I can think of.
There's another thing that I can think of is the Samoan, our minds, right? We grow up doing what we're told, and then when it comes to the time to be creative and think out of the box, we can't do that. Like, we can't make that switch to think out of the box. Especially, we talked about the topic of being comfortable, kids who leave their parents and they can't make that adjustment into life. They can't survive by themselves. And it can pertain to like job opportunities or socializing. We can't make that switch, to come up with ideas by ourselves.
That's a definite real thing. I know that. I feel like I've been kind of caught in that trap a bit myself. It's funny because like I try to I call myself an artist, but sometimes it's weird to think that I don't consider myself a creative person, because I have the skill of being able to draw, but coming up with things to draw I'm not as creative as I used to be. But it's a skill set I challenge myself to reobtain. But yeah, I don't know if it's just upbringing in my household or even just the military life itself, or maybe it's just on a artist block, who knows. But I do get to the point where if I'm not told to do something, I probably won't do anything. But I think another thing that may stem from having an issue of this respect-driven culture is along the lines of abuse. Like T mentioned, sexual abuse and rape and whatnot, and that is a major thing. But even physical abuse, I know that it is not an uncommon thing in Samoan households, that it is very typical to practice physical discipline, sasa, and getting sasa. And it's like, I'm not a parent, so it's hard for me I will never pretend that I speak with any kind of authority here. But to me, in my mind, there is a difference between physical discipline and abuse. And I have known some people where it's like they weren't just getting sasa, they weren't just getting disciplined, they're getting abused. But because we have this culture of respect where it's like, no, that is your parents' right to do that, and you are wrong for denying that. And there is a culture of people who will turn a blind eye knowing that that is the case, and do nothing about it, because you would be in the wrong to tell a parent they can't do that to their child. And that is a prominent thing. I know that's unfortunately not an uncommon thing, but that's a definite issue I would see with that.
The other thing that I just thought of is communication. That's probably why we can't express ourselves to others, especially when we come here in America. We're not able to get our emotions out, to explain what's in our mind, to explain how we're feeling, and to basically communicate. We don't have no social skills. We don't have no vocabulary and all that stuff. It can be education or other factors, but to me, again, do as you're told. That concept is probably the reason why we can't express ourselves. We can't open up to people.
Yeah, I think it's right in the lines of what you were saying, Mike. And it's one of those things where I think the downfall is, and that's one of the big things is, and that's like a lot of the my family members, it's where do what you're told and don't do what I do type thing. And then I question that, and I'm questioning, well, if you're gonna teach this thing and do another thing, don't you think, I try to be smart, I try to mention that, and then that's where you get a slap, or you get sasa pretty much. And it's kind of one of those things too where, like, I just want to do so much and I want to say so much, but I'm getting, I get held back. I think about Sasa, and then I'm like, oh, it's like one of those reinforcement things because of your environment that you grow up in. And I think that's one of the biggest downfalls, is just that, like what you're saying, coming out to the States or anywhere for that matter, we try to express ourselves, and it's really hard to form some sort of expression because, we have this, I guess, trauma, so to speak, because that's still there. So you kind of held back from doing a lot of things. And, I'm not to say that it's happened to me, but I mean, I'm just talking in general here. But I know that's one of the hard things in our culture is trying to point something out to the elders, and then they shoot you down. And then I'm like, okay, when's the time? What chance? I know our culture is always like the younglings are the future generation, and then we were trying to say something, and then they're like trying to shoot you down. I'm like, all right, so I don't get it. So I just carry on, my day, and it is what it is. But I don't try to let that affect me. What's important to me is what my mom and dad tells me, That's important to me. Extended family, yeah, it's their opinion, but I don't really follow. I just beat to my own drum in different ways.
The sad thing is it's almost like a generational curse. Unless we stop it in our generation, it's gonna keep continuing. We're gonna keep passing it down to our kids. Our kids will pass it on to their kids, and I'm very guilty of that. What I've learned from my parents growing up, I'm continuing that towards my kids. For an example, if they try to speak up on something that I would think it's an excuse, I would immediately stop them and then I would correct them, which is why I think my daughter is a complete rebel right now. Like everything we say, she will talk back. If you don't catch it, she will like stick out her tongue at you, and that's when she gets a whooping from me. So yeah, it's a sad thing, but I work on it all the time to try to break that curse and allow my kids to speak their mind, because I know the trauma that it will cause them, or it already has caused for them, because that trauma, I'm a product of that trauma, right?
So this is kind of where I'm having a bit of a challenge still, because outside of the Samoan aspect of respect, I'm having challenges in that in the modern army, because the army is a very different army now than the one I enlisted in 2004. And look, I'm not one of those guys where I'm saying that everything new is bad. They made a lot of changes that are good changes, but they're also doing a lot more of a touchy-feely, nicer army that I don't think is conducive to an effective military branch. And it's just one of those things where I have to check myself, where am I being the old school guy that's trying to preserve something of value, or am I being the old school guy who's trying to keep us in the dark? And it's just one of those things where I'm coming up on my 20 in a few years, and I really am just, I'm not going to say I'm just looking forward to getting out of the army, but it is one of those things where I'm like, man, I really am a relic. I enlisted when 9/11 was on the front of everybody's minds. Now I'm serving with soldiers that were not even born when 9/11 happened. It's a mind trip for me, but I'm trying to, my challenge is, you remember what The Rock used to always say, know your role, shut your mouth. There are times where that is still how it's supposed to be. There's times and settings for everything. And there's times and settings in the military where your role really is, you need to shut your mouth and do what I tell you. But the Army's almost steering in a direction where they're encouraging people talking back, and like things that I would have never dreamed of as a young private. I got kids rolling their eyes at me when I tell them to do stuff. But I'm like, look, I don't even put that on the new generation to say, oh, it's these kids. That's on my generation. We're the ones who set the standard. We're the ones who hold them to the standard. We're the ones who tell them the standard to meet. If they're meeting a lower standard, that's on my generation for setting the bar lower. Anyways, it's one of those balancing acts where I'm trying not to be the hard up dude, where I'm enforcing I don't intend it to be toxic for my guys, but I feel like I fail them as a leader by letting them just run around and do whatever they want, because that's not how a military is run. I need to know that when push comes to shove, when I ask to do something crucial, you're going to do it, whether or not I have time to explain to you why it's a crucial task. But once again, that is a fine line, because there are guys who have abused that same power and that same mindset in the past. It's almost like there's that metaphor of the pendulum swinging. Got that blade just swinging back and forth. And it's like right now we're probably too far off this way, pendulum, and we're correcting it, and it's going too far off in the other direction. I'm really hoping that the Army starts to come to its senses, and that as it swings back, it starts to level out where it's supposed to be. And so, I don't know, it's a challenge for sure, because that element of respect is very important. But I'm not ignorant to the idea that some people have abused that authority and that notion of respect in the past.
You guys ever question that the Samoans of today are the Samoans of our culture or peoples that decided to go against the grain of wherever they stayed, wherever they're from? Like, like if they were from Africa, so to speak, they decided, hey, we're gonna get up and we're gonna travel and we're gonna leave. And so when they decided to migrate out of Africa, wherever we're from, we're part of that group of people. That's where we come from. Those group of people that decided, hey, we don't want to follow what you guys are doing. We're gonna travel. So they traveled, and then as they traveled, that code of ethics, that warrior mentality, respect was intact. Brought us all the way to where we are today. I don't know if we're from Lemuria. I don't know if you guys know the Lemuria, but that's another story. Anyhow, we get here, and then we become hunter gatherers. You had to hunt and how to get to survive, and it's really really hard to try to go against something like that. Just to go against thousands of years of history and try to, when somebody like The Rock says, shut your mouth and know your role. I imagine one of my uncles saying that to me back then. And then now I'm thinking about it, I kind of understand. But at the same time, this is a new time. So going back to what you were saying, maybe trying to adjust, take from what you got and from what the future, mesh it in the middle, especially, being a leader, it's really hard to try to adjust to the times. And, especially, these kids, man, you are correct, man. That's a trip, man. You got kids that's under your wing that that weren't even born when the Twin Towers came down. You have to read it in the book, or you have to tell them about it. But I think it's one of those things where bring the past, try to ignite it with the future, and find something that's going to mesh everything together. But and that's where I go back to our Samoan history, man, where we're from. And, respect was one of those key things that held everything together. And, even when I try to question a lot of the things growing up, learning, I go back and I sit down, I'm like, okay, I kind of understand it. Because even though it's been thousands of years, just having that fabric that touches to the past is something important. And I think trying to teach that to our kids so they can, is something that I think is good, but with our twist, like you mentioned, just we take what the past brings us and then try to adjust it to our real world life today, especially living out here in the States.
So, as a basketball coach, so we all have these values instilled in us, and then I even see it, people our age, close or older. But yeah, like you two been speaking on it, it's our responsibility to pass these values on and make sure this younger generation understands, of course, with our adjusted perspective and the execution of these things. But like I see it in this tiny little community, man, tiny little community, got pretty much most of the kids don't want to put in the work that it takes to compete at a level at the high school that I coach at. Very rarely I see the old school parents like my mom and dad, who they're supportive and wouldn't really let me quit, who would make sure I was at practice and taking care of school. But over here, every now and then you see the parents, but they don't really care that their kid's at practice. Is he really doing what he needs to do? Or is he taking care of schoolwork? Sure, there may be other circumstances that affect that. But I look at them and I remember like, oh man, these guys are my age. This is my generation who's got kids old enough to be in high school, but I don't really see the values that I know the parents have within the children. And that's one thing, I'm trying to remember daily as I'm trying to improve, myself as a father. That's one big lesson now that I'm thinking of all the time is just the passing on of values. And that hopefully these kids, they don't have to be like me, learning way after the fact. They know it now so that they can be set up for success, as opposed to bigger pitfalls and having to pick themselves up. Which could be great lessons, because I had to dig myself out of many holes that I dug myself in. But I would rather, if we had the ability to make it effective now, make them know and at least understand if they don't appreciate it just yet.
I think one of my favorite little metaphors that on that subject is this. I don't know if you guys heard the one about the kite. There's that kid that was flying the kite with his dad, and the kite was going higher and higher and higher, and pretty soon they ran out of string, and they're just at the end, and the kid's like, "Dad, I want the kite to go as high as it can." It's like, why don't we cut the string and let it go? And the dad's like, "You shouldn't do that, because then it won't fly at all." The kid's like, no, I want it to go high. And so he cuts the string, and then the kite goes plummeting to the ground. And the kid had to learn that it was the string that allowed it to stay in the air. And that string is like our values. And it's like trying to instill that into the new generation, whether they be children, whether they be soldiers, whether they be co-workers or little cousins, whoever you're trying to look out for. You need to understand, like, at its best, when it's not abused, when we try to instill principles and values and respect, it's not because we're trying to hold them back. It's not because we want them to not have fun. It's not because I just want to flex on them and prove that I'm the boss. It's because I think these are things that are going to benefit them as they go forward in the future. And I would be failing them to let them think that just cut the strings and do what you want, because that's what will lead them to crashing.
To kind of touch on what Ati mentioned earlier, I'm one of those people who will continue to learn and embrace our culture, but I'm never gonna look back. I'm not gonna go back to the past, because where we're at, the honey and the milk, it's sweet. We're basically at the promised land here, and the problems of the generation, of the old generation, their resolutions can't save or solve the problems that we have now, that we have to figure out and solve, especially with our kids in this generation. So that's my standpoint on it. I know people will look at it and think, now you think you're better than us, but that's not the point I'm trying to make here. You do whatever you think is best for yourself and your family, and you just move forward. You don't have to mimic or copy what other people are doing, because I will still continue to teach the Samoan culture with my kids, and also their Chinese side, and hopefully they will continue that along their line.
Yeah, a quick question for you guys. I think it's part of the topic anyway. Are you guys more of a mind or a heart person, or both? And the reason why I'm asking this is because we have our values, and then sometimes, your heart and your mind aren't set on certain things. And then, your mind might be bigger, and then your heart knows what to do, and then vice versa. And then you don't. So that's kind of like my question. For me, I'm more of a half and half. I'm a mind and heart person. Whatever I put my mind to it, my heart always follows. And just tying in some research on this, a lot of the serial killers out there, they're mostly heavy on the mind, less on the heart. I don't know why I brought that topic up, but it's very interesting. Just fun fact for our listeners out there. And I'm not to say if you're heavy on your mind, I'm just saying, that's just a fun fact. Yeah. So I'm half and half. And what I mean by that is, I kind of wear a lot of my emotions, but at the same time, my brain tells me the scientific part and the mathematical part, and calculates everything. And then my emotion doesn't get the better of me sometimes. And what I mean by that is a lot of times I have to hold myself back, especially when I was in the military, from trying to hit somebody. Just try to, somebody get on you. And then my mind's telling me, if I do this, X and X is going to happen. And my heart says, well, why don't you just kick his ass right now? Take your rank off, take it to the tree line, take care of this mess right now. And then my brain's like, don't do that, brother. So, I don't know if that's why I just wanted to see if you guys are half and half like me, or mind or heart.
So what you're trying to see is if there's a serial killer in our group. So basically for me, I fall along the same line as you. I am half, but it leans more towards the heart, because the mind, it's always based on what my experience is currently. So whatever the knowledge, the education, life experiences, at that point, I would use my heart to guide whatever choice I make in my life. So that's how I've gotten to this point at my life in regards to jobs, relationships, and just basically everything in life general is depend on my mind to feed me the knowledge and the wisdom, and then I have my heart decide if I'm going to lean left or right, or if I'm going to, the same aspect as whooping someone or just staying humble.
I'm grateful that you brought this question up, because it actually touches on something I meant to bring up earlier, but I kind of got off on a tangent like I usually do. I'm definitely of both. And the main reason why is because of my dad, because I know I've talked about the church being the emphasis of where I got my values. My dad was at one time a bishop in our ward, but my dad was also a science teacher. My dad taught junior high general sciences for 32, 34 years, something like that, while also teaching geology on the college level at the COD, teaching night courses. My dad he'd be reading his scriptures on one hand and quoting it and reciting it and telling me the lessons from the Spirit. But then he would also be reading Stephen Hawking's books, and he would have like science magazines and like keeping up on current research, etc. My dad was of both worlds, two things that people usually think are contradictory. And I'm grateful for the perspective that I got from my dad, because basically my dad everybody has their journeys of faith, but as I knew him as my dad growing up, I've always known him as a man of faith while also being a man of science, that even where you think they conflict, just remember that the gospel, the church is true, do good to your family, live the values, and also don't deny yourself the learning science and all matters of whatnot. And that's guided me as I've grown up, because I've explored a lot of different philosophies. I like to listen to even a lot of atheist philosophers like the Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and I find value in a lot of what they have to say. But I am also convinced to join them on the atheist side of the fence, because I do also have my spiritual experiences to balance it out. It has enabled me to find value in what everybody has to say, while also grounding me firmly in what has benefited me and my family as well. And so I'm grateful for that. So I definitely consider myself both the heart and the mind. And I credit that to my parents, and especially my dad.
Looking at the course of my life, I'd say I operated heavily more on the heart, because I'm a deep thinker, but most of the times, if you see a lot of my actions, it was because, I felt like it, or I wanted to see what it felt like. It's just what I was feeling at the time. And of course, a lot of those actions too, like, what were you thinking? Like, I wasn't. I was just feeling, and, now I know. Now I know for certain, and I will remember, and my heart will remind me. But Yeah, so good to know that I'm not a serial killer. Like for a minute there, I was like, man, I'm a deep thinker. But then I think about most of my actions in life. I was like, nah, that's from the heart. My dumb ass was from the heart.
And being of the heart, it does not make you a dummy either. Like, the matters of the heart, like that takes a lot of thought as well. It's like you can definitely be completely of the heart, and that doesn't mean that you're not intellectual by any means. Because the matters of the heart are some of the most complex things to sort out, for sure. And it's like I can be all up in my head thinking that I'm gonna logically sort something out, but there's certain triggers where it's like all that goes out the window, and it's gonna be, why'd you do that? And like you said, like, I wasn't thinking.
Thank you for tuning into our episode. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. Please share your experience with us or suggest a topic you would like us to talk about. Tō whāsoi fua.